Why don't I have them here? Because there's a wrinkle, which I won't go into. Maybe it can come in the Q&A section. But even great public universities like Purdue and Michigan find a way to put alumni on the board, even though they are run by the state. Now, why does the alumni governance work so well? By the way, the university that pioneered this alumni governance model was a state university that was being bled by the state in the United States. Most people today would not recognize that university as a state school. In fact, even professors and graduates of that institution do not know that it was a state school, and that is Harvard University. So Harvard University was a Sarkari institution, a government institution, which was being strangulated by the state, and then on the 29th of April, 1865, by 1 vote in the Senate and 2 votes in the House of the state of Massachusetts, it was turned over to the alumni. Now, why do alumni work so well? Now, I'm not going to go into great detail, but if you want the detailed answer, you can read my paper. But the short answer is the following. Alumni governance takes care of all the problems that I talked about. Asymmetric information, moral hazard, public goods problem. How? Nobody knows more about the institution than the alumni. So if you put, for example, Rochester alumni on the board of Rochester, and by the way, Rochester has majority alumni on the board, they don't need a year or two to get up to date with what the institution is doing. They know everything. They know the professors, they know the gossip, they know what is good, what is bad, where the bodies are buried, quote unquote, and they know exactly what to do about it. That is number one. Number two, and this is the most important point, because the market mechanism doesn't work, the alumni are the perfect people to be on the board because their human capital is tied directly to the ranking of the university or the prestige of the university. So Jane just mentioned that Rochester slipped 20 positions in the rankings. Now, the people who would be most concerned about it would be none other than the alumni of Rochester. In fact, I guarantee you, I don't know, I've not seen the board minutes, but if I would see the board minutes of Rochester, you know, the alumnus of Rochester would get up and say, how can this happen? You know, this great university, my alma mater, this is falling in the rankings, we must do something. The president will say, but ma'am or sir or whatever, we need more money. They say, we'll get you the money, but by God, you know, get this university back up in the rankings. So the reason why the alumni governance works is because it aligns incentives. Nobody cares more about the institution more, and nobody knows about the institution more than the alumni. So the moment you and this is the reason why the moment Harvard went to alumni governance, within 2 years Yale copied and became 100% alumni governed, and Columbia and others also came a little later because of the issues that I identified. But today, if you look at the top 100 universities in the US, including private universities, including religious universities, you will see that the percentage of alumni on the board is more than 2/3 on average. And amongst the top universities, it is close to 100%. For Harvard, the university that pioneered this, by law, they're required to have 100% alumni on the board. You cannot have a non-alumnus on the board of Harvard. So they pioneered this model, and they forgot about it. Meaning, this has not been written about. And I remember having this conversation with one of my teachers and somebody who's now become a good friend, Henry Rosowski, one of the great economic historians in the world, who was the provost at Harvard, the dean of the School of Arts and Sciences, and for 2 years, the acting president. He wrote a book that I'm going to sort of refer to in a minute called The University and Owner's Manual. He said, it's very odd that an Indian had to point this out to us. We never knew the extent of alumni governance in the United States. So this point is not very well known even in the United States as to how much of a game changer this was. Harvard was a small provincial university in 1865. After it was given alumni governance, they got all the funds and within a couple of decades moved to the front ranks of world institutions and have never looked back. So that's alumni governance. Very quickly, I'll come back to this, I'm running out of time, but I want to share another fascinating thing, which again I have not shared anywhere publicly. This is the first time, this is not even in any paper. So the challenge of the faculty. So if you look at, I'm just going to compare universities with the corporate sector. In the universities, in the corporate sector, you can hire people, you can incentivize them, you can rotate them, you can train them, you can observe them, you can promote them, you can retire them, and you can fire them. You can do all 8 things. In the university environment, 2 of these you can do to some extent, the other 7 you cannot do. Right? So it's very clear that faculty decide what they want to teach. I mean, the department, nobody, I mean, I don't tell my faculty what to teach. Each of the groups basically figures out that this is my interest, this is what needs to be taught. Collectively, we decide. I have no role in telling them what to do. In fact, nobody tells them what to do. Collectively, they decide what to do. They jolly well decide what they're going to work on in terms of research. They decide which conferences to go to. They decide which continuing education courses they want to do. I don't observe what they do. I cannot observe what they do. To some extent, I have imperfect information about student feedback, but really nobody knows what is it that they do in the class, frankly. And in terms of promotion, we have very little role in terms of their promotions. It's peer reviews. I reach out to the broader ecosystem and get reviews. Retirement age, I was his research assistant for 3 years. Amartya Sen is still going strong, full-time faculty member at Harvard at 86. There's no retirement age. And unless, I think today the only thing that you can be fired for is harassment, right? Other than that, you can do pretty much anything that you want, other than stealing, I imagine. But, and you can't be fired. So, and by the way, I'll share with you some fascinating statistics about even the hiring decision is not really in the university. So let me share that with you. So I'm not going to, so this is about how you build culture. I'm going to come back to it. But these two books, I'm going to take something very interesting from these. Janos Kornai, again, I was his RA for a couple of years, one of the great economists in the world, the person who wrote literally the book on transition economies. And then Henry Rosofsky, whom I've already talked about, and the University and Owners Manual, they document, and I'm going to take you through a couple of slides which I just prepared last night for this talk after the wonderful dinner that Raj hosted for us. So, so what does it say? So this is from Janos Kornai's and Rosofsky's books about how a Harvard professor is hired. By the way, they promote very few from within, very few. An assistant and an associate professor very seldom makes it to full professor at Harvard. Most of the 8 times out of 10, the person comes in from outside. And it's a 2-year-long process that goes all the way up to the board. And this is what you need to understand about why the university is so special. So this is what Kornai says. He says if you need a professor, and he takes the example of the Department of Economics and Corporate Finance. So first of all, they'll constitute a committee of full professors to meet and say, first of all, do we really need this position? Then if they say, yes, we do, then the search committee is appointed by the department chair, and they discuss a certain number of candidates. So people get their resumes from the web, talk to people, download their papers, read them, and form a view, and say, I like this particular candidate, let's see if we can initiate the process with regard to that person. So the department chair then comes back into the picture and basically sends several names to people in that field in corporate finance, including the person that the search committee has decided, and says, without saying, you know, we are thinking of Professor X, they'll say, what do you think about these 10 people? Are they worthy of being appointed at Harvard? And then they get blind reviews. Then the provost or the president appoints a committee, what is called an ad hoc committee, and then if the professor checks out, they take a vote, and then the votes are sent to the president, who constitutes now, remember it's not done there, who constitutes an ad hoc committee, including one expert from another Harvard school. So for example, they may call Professor Marx and say, look, you are a legal scholar, this person has done a lot of work in corporate finance and the law, will you please read his papers and give us an independent opinion so that there are no cliques that are being formed in the economics department. And then they also bring in 2 outside experts. Then they are called, the president buys them lunch, and they sit down and deliberate, and then they say, yes, this is a good process, this person is good, you should hire that person. And then the president takes a call, the president may actually turn that person down. And then if that happens, it makes it to the Crimson next morning, because by that time the information is quite widely known that the president has turned down a recommendation. And by the way, at MIT this goes even a step beyond that. Even after the president decides, and this I learned from from the chair of the MIT board who came to see one of my talks. He had read this paper that I'm talking about. His name is Bob Millard. So he said that ultimately an MIT professor's recommendation comes to the board. So even the president cannot appoint that professor. The board then deliberates and decides whether the professor is going to be appointed or not. And I said, why on earth would the board spend that much time? So he said, so this is what Bob Millard said. He said, this is the single most important decision that we can make in the university. And secondly, please understand that it's a $5 million decision, because if the professor is going to be with us for 35 years, you know, if they are appointed in their late 30s or early 40s, and they may, like Amartya Sen, have a good 40 years ahead of them at that age, then it's a capital decision. So ladies and gentlemen, what I'm trying to get across is precisely because the usual hiring and firing mechanisms do not work, you choose the people that you bring into this wonderful institution so carefully. It's a multi-year process to hire just one individual, where everybody from the president to potentially even the board gets involved. Why? Because you don't want any duds. It's like, I call this how marriage partners are chosen, or used to be chosen in India, right? The whole family gets involved, and you know, the mother has a vote, and the father has a vote. You know, even if it's a son-in-law or a daughter-in-law, you know, there's a huge amount of due diligence that is done, because they know that in traditional Indian families, there's no divorce, right? There's no divorce. There should not, or at least there used to not be. So you chose